will be instantly connected. Please feel free to contact my office at 952-405-8510 to sign up for our next telephone town hall meeting. Please stay on the line, and you will be instantly connected.
Please hold while we connect you to your Access Live event. This Access Live event is currently in progress. Please note that this call may be monitored, recorded, or rebroadcast.
Gun violence research just hasn't existed. And there seems to be a lot of resistance on the part of Congress to, I guess, providing for the NIH and the CDC and other organizations to be able to properly fund. And I happen to be a pediatrician by training, and I'm not sure whether you're aware, but guns are now the third leading cause of child death in the United States. Guns. And I guess I have some real concerns about the incredible inaction in Congress for something that by any other measure would be ruled a public health disaster and emergency.
Got it. Okay. Well, Pamela, first of all, thanks for offering the insight, particularly as a doctor and a pediatrician who is seeing patients. One thing, and maybe you're not aware of this, is that literally a month ago, the decades-old ban on gun violence research that had been at the federal level was lifted. So that is no longer the case. Now, the CDC, NIH can all do basic research, can do gun violence research, and physician community, I would anticipate, will have this pushed out to the physician community. Because as policymakers, if we're going to have effective solutions, we got to have facts, and basic research is part of government's responsibility or duty. And the good news is that was lifted, and partly it was lifted because of pressure after some of these tragedies that have happened for those of us that advocated that it makes no sense to have this research ban in place, because quite honestly, a lot of gun groups had said, we don't want to allow that because we think it'll lead towards promoting gun control. But again, from my perspective, collecting basic research and data allows you to essentially come up with good policies, right? So that actually was just lifted. So that's the good news. It's moving in the right direction. And so it opens the door to allow you and others to ask those questions, to get more info. That's what we should be doing, actually. So now we'll always have the question of more funding, right? And that'll be sort of the next step. It's like, okay, is it adequate now? Should there be a little bit more? And there'll be benchmarks, I would anticipate, based on the results of how NIH or CDC then turn and come back to us to ask questions. So good point. I appreciate it. All right. Thanks for the question. We've got Steve in Chaska. Thanks for waiting.
Okay, I got a couple questions for you. One, it's not the guns that do the killing. It's the people that's doing the killing. Can you hold for one moment?
Well, you'll have to go quick here, Steve.
Yeah, definitely. I've got a congressman or senator on the other line. Can you call me back in a minute? Are we still good?
All right, Steve, you have to go pretty quick here.
Huh? Anything you know. I didn't understand that.
All right, I'm going to have to let Steve go here. We're going to get on to our next question here. All right, we're going to have to keep rolling. Okay, I think we've got Jeff on the line. So, Jeff on the line from Excelsior. Thanks for waiting.
Thanks for allowing me to speak, or ask a question, I should say.
Yeah, what's up?
Well, I am calling as somebody that listened to the Republicans use talking points against the Democrats about fiscal responsibility for 8 years in the Obama administration, and now as soon as they have essentially full authority across Congress and the White House, they've done nothing but drive up the deficit through legislation and tax policy. And I know you're going to revert to talking points about economic growth, but there is literally no talk about a balanced budget anymore. And I guess I would ask, at what point are you willing to either acknowledge that you're done talking about a balanced budget or actually work toward a balanced budget. Not only a balanced budget, but a surplus is what we need to actually reduce the outstanding debt.
Right.
And there's just no talk of that since January of last year.
Yeah, well, Jeff, you're right to raise the spending side of the ledger, actually. And for those of us that have always talked about the importance of a deficit or having a balanced budget, and the House, as an example, has passed a budget that balances always in a 10-year window. Now, you can't just do it in 2 years because that would end up, having dramatic cuts, et cetera. So, we're still on track. We've been doing those 10-year or those budgets that have a 10-year window and then have balance and then pay down surpluses, like you say. So the reality is, obviously, if no tax reform happens, we were projected to have 1.9% economic growth, 2%. We were told by all the economists and CBO we would never do any better. And so if you don't have a growing competitive economy, baby boomers, seniors aren't going to have important government programs that they rely on there anymore, or young people aren't going to have the opportunity for a better future in climbing up an economic ladder to pay off college loans or find their next job. So the good news is record levels, and it's been recognized now by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, actually, that it's because of the tax reform that growth is where it's at 3.3%. They're projecting up to 4.1% this quarter. So it's kind of getting back to that Ronald Reagan stage. And the reality is that, and we are talking about a balanced budget, so we even had a vote on a balanced budget amendment recently in the House. Now, it didn't get two-thirds because we've always been short of getting two-thirds vote, but I think we should always be doing that. And members of both parties are responsible for where we've been on the deficit. It's not one party or the other. But you're right, a lot of Democrats, they didn't care about the deficit, or, when they were just focusing on the spending side for the last 8 years. And a lot of Republicans, and I'm not one who just believes that you can just, cut taxes pay for themselves. But clearly we've got better economic growth now, and we're in a better position versus the size of the economy versus just the size of the number of the debt or our deficit where we're at right now. And that's really the bottom line of how we can make progress on that, which is really, really important, obviously, if we're going to if we're going to be successful. And we also know, I think, that the biggest drivers of debt are health care programs. And so some of that is making sure we have more quality standards, for instance, on Medicare, and not paying providers for fee-for-service, but it's actually oriented on quality of care and chronic care management and coordinated care. And that's where we have to drive the conversation. I've actually teamed up with some of my colleagues, some liberal Democrats, actually, for some legislation along that front that will do that. Now, we haven't gotten the attention of leadership and others, but we're trying, and that's a bigger question. We're going to need more support, and hopefully, folks like you and others can actually be out there talking about or helping along those fronts. Okay, we're going to keep rolling. Let's keep going. We've got, it looks like, we have Allison in the line from Wayzata.
Correct.
Hey, Allison.
Hey there. To follow on to what you just said, we seem to be a little bit all over the board. So basically, from what we've seen, in support of your esteemed leaders, it looks like you want to really more gut Medicare, Medicaid, cripple Social Security, make cuts to those entitlement programs. But also with the latest announcement, there's a huge, if not elimination of CHIP. And it goes against everything that you just answered to Jeff. So how do you ride both sides of that coin?
Yeah, well, again, I'm not aware of anyone who's proposing cutting Social Security or Medicare, Allison, actually. I'm not sure where that is. Now, on CHIP, we actually just passed a 10-year reauthorization of the Children's Health Insurance Program, and it's funded at the longest recorded level ever in history. So that's good news. It's good news for Minnesota. There's no cuts to the program. It's moving in the right direction. And for some of us, I was going to say it's probably 3-4 months ago that said we had to get this fixed because Minnesota was one of 4 states, essentially, that was in a little bit of dire straits situation. We were able to get the attention of others and actually pass that. So it went from a 5-year reauthorization to a 10-year program. So we got 10 years of Children's Health Insurance Program, solidly funded and in a really good position now. So that's all going good. And no one's talking about cutting Medicare and Social Security. Obviously, reform, sure. Chronic care management, Ron Wyden and I, he's a liberal Democrat in the Senate, and I and some others have put together some ideas around better care, lower costs for more health care rather than sick care. We got patient groups and Mayo Clinic and other organizations supporting that work, but we have to get that a little bit bigger, and spread that out a little bit more. Okay, thanks much. We're going to keep rolling. We've got Greg on the line from Victoria. Thanks for waiting.
Hi, Mr. Paulsen. Thanks for taking the question. My question, it's probably kind of an offshoot of some of the stuff people have been talking about. I think one of my big concerns, I feel like I'm in a good spot. I feel like a lot of the people on the call probably are too, but I'm kind of worried about some of the long-term direction for our country as a whole. And I guess my concern on that is it's really the debt and the deficit. I struggle a little bit. I see how the tax cut policy can cause some business economic activity, and I can see how it can benefit people to some degree. But my concerns are these trillion-dollar projected, debts or deficits, coming up and adding to the long-term debt. And I guess even that, a lot of the corporate activity, it just seems like so much of it goes back to stock buybacks and stuff that helps shareholders, but not necessarily Main Street. So I guess I'm curious, and I'm looking for long-term direction from both the Democrats and the Republicans to tackle this big mountain that we're giving our kids.
Yeah, and it is a big mountain, just as you said, Greg, a really big mountain. Domestic discretionary spending actually went down for 4 years in a row and declined. This year it bumped back up a little bit because of some other additional military spending, but even the spending that's taking place this year in the agreement is lower than 2010 levels. And that was when President Obama was there for it was about a year and a half, almost 2 years. So we're even below the 2010 levels, which does show you the real spending issues come with those mandatory spending programs, the programs that have essentially been offline. So you've got Medicare and some of the reforms we talked about. If you're going to make sure that Social Security is safe and secure for future generations, you've got to have an agreement that's done bipartisanly, very similar to what Ronald Reagan did with a Democratic Congress, to making sure that that's going to be preserved and protected for future generations, as well as Obamacare, obviously. And that's offline, too. That is a mandatory spending program. And look, the Affordable Care Act helped a lot of folks on the access side, didn't do anything for costs. And so we continue to see premiums go up, a lot of impact on a pocketbook level to individuals, families, small businesses, et cetera. Now, it's been somewhat alleviated in Minnesota, because remember, Minnesota was number 4 in the country for our premiums going up in health care costs. But then the state legislature kind of put a Band-Aid in and put some money in on a reinsurance program, which was good. And we should be having other states do the same thing, as well as covering the cost of some of those programs. Now, that's going to run out in a year. And so then this October, we'll see what the impact is going to be. And on the stock buyback side, you're right about that. The good news about stock buybacks is that it helps the overall broader economy. I mean, you not only have, half the population, obviously, who owns stock in something, but, economics proves or shows that when you have stock buybacks happening, it means money goes into other investments. It goes into solid companies in other areas, not just the company might be doing the buyback, but it gets reinvested in other portions of the economy. And so those long-term benefits are going to happen. One of my colleagues was talking about visiting with a Starbucks employee. And this is a young guy. He's essentially a co-manager of the operation, not making a lot of money, but he has a young family. And he just said, I want to thank you for the tax overhaul and the stock buyback provision that's getting a lot of criticism now. It's actually helping me, because now I'm young and I want to save for my retirement. And this is actually going to help me down the road. And that's another component of how it's giving a boost to people that, you don't normally see at firsthand or first blush, in essence. So good point, Greg, though, about the concern about just the debt and what we're leaving on our kids. And the good news is record surplus in April. Now we got to focus on the other side of the ledger, on the spending side, because the revenue is coming in stronger. The economy is doing better. And we still have 6.6 million jobs that are unfilled. We need those jobs filled, whether it's with immigration or workforce issues, and redirecting funds to making sure people are filling those spots, which is very, very important. Okay, we're going to keep rolling. Before I ask the next question, though, let me ask a question of you, and you can just hit a quick button on your phone to give a response. This will be just to be a quick perspective. Hit 1, 2, or 3 on your telephone. So here's the question for you. As you probably know, you were following the president's announcement to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. Now, this was a nuclear deal that was first negotiated by President Obama. They didn't have enough votes to pass it as a treaty, so they did it sort of as double secret probation, and sort of had a different kind of way of making sure it got through, knowing that they couldn't get broad support for it. So it sets up this deal with Iran for a certain period of time, essentially allowing them, to eventually get nuclear capability. And the administration made the decision just a week ago to withdraw. So the question for you is, do you agree with the administration's decision to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal? If you agree, hit 1 on your phone. If you don't agree, hit 2 on your phone. And if you're undecided, hit 3. Because, again, not always an easy answer, and there's more information, so we get that. But if you agree that it was the right decision to withdraw from the Iran nuclear agreement, hit 1 on your phone. If you don't agree, wrong decision, hit 2. And if you're undecided, hit 3. And this one's been fairly split with folks, over the years, actually. But, again, 1 if you support it, 2 if you don't, 3 if you're undecided. Okay, we're going to keep rolling. I think we got Brian on the line from, maybe Basim, actually, from Excelsior. Thanks for waiting. Hey, Basim, how are you?
Good.
What's up?
I was wondering, how do you feel about the president moving the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, though all and every president that we had previously had never considered it?
Okay. Yeah, and so on moving the embassy, right, to Jerusalem?
Correct. And the second question, really quickly, and I'm a Democrat, but I did vote it for you. Don't tell anybody I said that. But anyway, I'm just curious how do you feel about the genocide that's been taking place in Gaza on the border right now?
Yeah. So there's 2 issues there. One, you're kind of hitting right on the pulse of what's in the news on a foreign policy perspective, obviously, Basim, and obviously you got North Korea as well. But I would say this, is that I have supported moving the embassy to Jerusalem, but I've supported that for years. I mean, everyone has referred to Jerusalem as the capital. A lot of other countries and some other countries have followed the decision as well recently. I will say this, though. Both the House and the Senate, from my understanding, have already voted for this, have passed this as a resolution saying it should be moved. They've done, and it's very bipartisan. It's very, very overwhelming. It's not even a close vote. Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate, strongly supports moving the embassy to Jerusalem. So this is not a partisan issue at all. It has been a long time recognized issue of where the capital would be, right? And so I've supported that. The issue on the border, though, or of Gaza, I mean, I'm concerned about that. The violence is obviously terrible. It's unfortunately, and the concern is that I would say this: both sides absolutely have to be working to ensure you've got peace along that border, but also in the entire region. And we're going to have, I think, some trying times because of this decision on the embassy, linked with the fact that Israel is having its 70th birthday right now as a country, right? The United Nations, when they first set them up as a country. And so Israel is doing everything they can, from what I understand, to making sure that the folks that are coming across the border, that there's not violence if possible. And this is hard because Hamas, right, the organization in Palestine, has been putting a lot of unarmed children and civilians and putting them up front and kind of forcing them across the border, which is obviously a big problem. So I think, one other piece that's good news about having Jerusalem labeled as the capital that other countries are following now is it takes that off the table. And it allows us to better focus and get a better perspective on how we achieve peace in the region with compromise. And that is really important, is compromise. And it's one of the things I always say in Congress: compromise is not a dirty word. And that's part of effective policy. If you want to have progress in something, you've got to make sure you are allowing a positive move forward, and you don't have to get 100% of what you want all the time. And that goes into a lot of different issues, for instance. So, okay, we're going to keep rolling. Again, dial *3 on your telephone, and I think we've got Joan on the line, or Joanne, Joan from Eden Prairie. Thanks for waiting.
Yes, call me Joan.
Okay, hi, Joan.
Hi. It's in regards to, everything moves just so fast daily. My head spins with politics, but I come from a family of farmers. We rent our land in northwest Minnesota. Very concerned about the low commodity prices, that we've had. obviously President Trump said we have trade wars going on again with China and Mexico. They've already started the soybean. We're going to have trouble in farming, and farmers pretty much supported President Trump in Minnesota, and we are not happy.
Yeah.
What do you feel, and what's your influence? And I know Senator Klobuchar has spoken out. I have not heard your feelings.
Yeah, well, Joan, I've actually spoken out as well, and I did right away and early. I'm very concerned about the president's approach to trade. I don't think anyone wins a trade war. I've had the opportunity with both Ambassador Lighthizer and Secretary of Commerce Ross to very directly, in an open public forum as a part of their testimony, very aggressively question them about these policies moving in the wrong direction. I think broad tariffs can backfire in a hurry. I approached it from the perspective of not only soybeans, but pork producers and other farmers in the ag community and the Farm Bureau and others that have expressed deep concerns from a state like Minnesota, for instance. And so I think we need a successful renegotiation of NAFTA that obviously modernizes it, but we shouldn't be withdrawing unilaterally. We should not have sunset provisions in there. We should not be thinking that we can just withdraw and expect no consequence. It would have a devastating impact on our economy, especially like Minnesota, when we have food processors like General Mills and others that are essentially selling 95% of their product going to Canada, as an example. So that's U.S. product that would be at jeopardy of being exported. And exports are one of the reasons why we've done really well as a state. And it's a lot of high-valued manufacturing, by the way, that has done well. And I brought it up personally once with the president when I had a chance to get in front of him on some of the issues surrounding this. And I even have led a letter now with some of my colleagues directly to Ambassador Lighthizer expressing the concerns about how our medical device community will be treated as a part of retaliatory trade measures also. So you got agriculture, you got medical device companies, and then you have consumer electronics that Best Buy and others are concerned about. And I'm also leading a letter on the consumer electronics side to making sure we are not doing a tit-for-tat in a trade war, because you do not win a trade war. Tariffs are taxes that get passed on to consumers and impact growers, farmers, and other manufacturers, which is why we got to pay attention to this. Okay, we're going to keep rolling. I think we got Michael on the line from Excelsior also. Thanks for waiting.
Yes. My question is, the administration seems to be doing everything it can to reverse environmental protection. This is very bothersome to me. And what is your thought on what they're doing?
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing off the bat where I am concerned about, and if you're familiar with the Boundary Waters, obviously in northern Minnesota, there was one legislation moving through, Republican-sponsored, moving through in the House by some of my colleagues, that would just grant the mineral leases again for copper sulfide mining in the Boundary Waters. And I think we should be basing those decisions on science. And I voted no on that. I was on the opposite side of it. And then the administration made the decision to also move on a regulatory front to make it easier for that to happen. And I've been speaking out against that. I think that's wrong. And I believe the Boundary Waters are like Minnesota's Yellowstone. And we have to have all the scientific review, base things on science on the environmental side. So, again, but I'm more of a Teddy Roosevelt Republican in that respect. I do a lot with the national parks and their conservation work, and get recognized for that. And obviously, the Boundary Waters is very important, not only to Minnesota, but it's the premier wilderness and largest in the country that people from around the country visit with. So those are big issues. And so there are some things where absolutely we've had too much regulation on the environmental side that don't make sense. But you can have common sense, efficient, and effective regulation at the same time that allows economic growth and have the balance for the environment. And that's where I'm at. And I've had to speak out against some of the provisions the administration has gone in a different direction recently. Okay, we're going to keep rolling. We got Randy from Plymouth. Thanks for waiting.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. We had a rather sad incident here in the cities where a 26-year-old or 27-year-old, I forget the details of it, but a young man died after he was taken off his parents' health insurance, because he couldn't afford the cost of insulin, which I think is, in this day and age, is an absolute tragedy. I'm wondering, what are you doing? What are your thoughts about the 1,000-fold increases in the cost of medicines that we Americans have to pay, which don't seem to be quite the same for people of other countries? In other words, those increases have not taken place other than in our country.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, well, here are my thoughts in general, and there's no easy answer, or it would have been solved, but I do think that we need to have access to more generic drugs. We've had a situation where some companies have intentionally put patents expired or back online under a different, company or whatever, and then essentially protect themselves, and we've made it more difficult for generics to come to market. That's finally, with the FDA, they're coming up with a new plan to allow entrance of more generics into the market, which is really important. I mean, obviously that might apply to insulin, but also to other drugs, which is really critical. And also look at where some of the successful aspects of where Medicare Part D, the drug space, and the drugs that have been used for seniors, for instance, because that has always come in under budget and has been a lot more successful. And we need to sort of apply that to other areas or other parts of drug coverage or drug pricing or Medicare for that matter, which is very important. And also make sure we've got more ability to use private negotiators in Part D to negotiate prices for those expensive drugs. We had the EpiPen incident that took place not too long ago as well. If you remember, with the cost of that skyrocketed, or there was someone that was trying to corner the market. There was another case of, I think, a drug. I can't remember the name of it now, but the gentleman was essentially caught and is gone through trial now and is expected to probably go to jail, if I remember correctly, on another drug abuse situation where they were cornering the market illegally. Is what was found. So there's more teeth that can be done in terms of laws, and your suggestions would be helpful there too. So if any of you have thoughts or ideas on that, don't hesitate to reach out. So one of the things I've done is I've continued to meet with healthcare providers and innovators, and this includes folks that do the research and development on new drugs and medical devices, for instance, because those technologies actually have the ability to lower costs, especially over time, which is a good thing, and we don't want to lose that. In fact, we should be enhancing it wherever possible. Okay, we got Ken on the line from Maple Grove. Thanks for waiting.
Hello, Eric.
Hey.
And I just wanted to touch bases regarding a bill that's moving through the Senate in relation to trying to roll back the repeal of the FCC rule change regarding net neutrality.
Oh, yeah, net neutrality, sure, yeah, okay, all right.
And it sounds like that's very close to making it through the Senate.
Okay.
If it does, where do you see that going in the House?
Yeah. Well, I'm not familiar with the Senate bill. I mean, I'll just give you my perspective on the concept of net neutrality. I absolutely believe we have to have a free and an open internet. I don't think these agencies, President Obama kind of had his agencies doing rules in one direction, and we did see a decline in internet investment in a couple of years when that took place. Then Trump gets in, and he's got a group that goes the other direction. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. I would prefer that Congress legislate this, that Congress make sure you don't have blocking, you don't have throttling, you don't prevent someone from being on a certain lane on the internet, and it's free and that it is open. That's my view. I've talked to a lot of smaller companies that want to make sure they've got access, they got the ability to market their new innovations, a lot of healthcare IT startups, for instance, in Minnesota, as an example, that have to have access, or your electronic medical records, for instance. So the whole concept of net neutrality is good, and the details matter, obviously. But I think we should be putting that in statute. I'm not familiar with what the Senate exactly does, but we should be putting it in statute rather than these agencies or the FCC kind of going back and forth all the time. That's my view. Okay, we're going to keep rolling. I think we got, it looks like Carol on the line from Orono. Thanks for waiting.
Good evening, Congressman. Thank you for taking my call.
Yeah.
I am interested in your thoughts on the concept of federal financial support for sanctuary cities, and now in the case of California, a sanctuary state.
Yeah, what do you think on those?
I guess I've always thought it was important to follow the law and that there were consequences if you didn't. Yeah. However, that doesn't seem to be the case when we deal with sanctuary cities.
Right. Well, and we have, Carol, we have had a vote in the House, actually, that essentially would guarantee that you've got to follow the letter of the law. So I support, cities and states should not be in the business of picking and choosing what laws they want to follow. And, and I think if federal funding is going to flow to these cities, they have to follow aspects of federal law. It's interesting in California now where you're seeing some cities actually vote opposite of where the state is or where some other larger cities are. They're actually saying we should not be sanctuary city. We should absolutely be following the law. And so there's a little sort of back and forth, or I don't want to say a battle going on in California, but there are some cities that are doing the opposite now to support and make sure they continue to get the federal funding. So, my view is, again, cities and states should not be in the business of picking and choosing what laws they're going to follow at the federal level. And if there's a problem, obviously you work it out in the courts, and you go down that direction, which takes time. But you don't just ignore it, but you would file something. Okay, we're going to keep rolling. We got Art on the line from Chaska. Art, thanks for waiting.
Hey, thanks for taking my call.
Yeah.
Senator Klobuchar is sponsoring a bill to make our election process in the various states more secure, maybe standardize a few things, and I'm hoping you support that. And number two, kind of in conjunction with that, is there any consensus within the House, and I guess your feelings on this, to allow Mueller to complete his Russian investigation?
Oh.
I feel like the investigation, he should be allowed to finish his job, and I don't know what form or context this is going to be presented to the American people. Obviously, there's some security issues and classified information issues to be dealt with, but so I'm hoping you're on board with that. And I've stopped reading John le Carre novels because I've got one right in front of me with the various press agencies dealing with this. So my feeling is it should continue, and I think if it can go as fast as possible, that'd be great. But I'm looking for objectivity. I'm hoping you're looking for the same thing.
Yeah. Oh, Art, thanks for raising that. By the way, if anyone wants to ask a question, dial *3 on your phone. So I've read a little bit about what Senator Klobuchar is doing on the election front. I think it's a good idea. And Minnesota has got a really good track record, right? We got a paper trail in elections. And look, the Russians are not our friends. It's no surprise they were trying to meddle. All our intelligence agencies confirmed that was the case. But they've been doing this in Europe for a long period of time, and they've been actually involved in pushing back on a lot of trade deals, for instance, and making them less attractive so that they can push Ukraine more to the east rather than to the west, for instance. And so they meddle in all that stuff. And so we should be providing resources, I think, to states to make sure we've got protections in place for any election we have so we can know they're safe or that they're secure and have confidence in them. And on the Mueller side, look, I absolutely think Mueller should be able to complete his investigation. Now, you ask, is there consensus in the House? I would say no, because some of my colleagues are like, absolutely, we should stop it. It's a witch hunt. I think he should be able to conclude the investigation. I mean, he was put in place as an independent counsel. I was one of the first people who called for the independent counsel after the firing of an FBI director. And I said, look, you've got to have an independent counsel. When you lose your FBI, law enforcement, neutral person, you've got to have an independent counsel in place. So he should be able to finish his work and it'd be done. And that's my view. And I think if for whatever reason that didn't happen, there would be a lot of opposition or a firestorm in the other direction. Okay, thanks for the question, and we're going to keep rolling. And by the way, if you want to ask a question, dial *3 on your phone. But we've got Catherine on the line from Eden Prairie. Thanks for waiting.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about our health care for small businesses and self-employees. we've been penalized under the Obamacare, and our payments are as much as house payments. In addition to that, we have very high deductibles. Also, I definitely am against single payer.
Yeah, yeah.
My other issue is college student loans. Is there any way you guys can reduce the interest rate or even bring it down to zero for these college students? I mean, my son is almost at $80,000 in debt for college.
Oh, okay, wow. All right, yeah. And is he out of college now or still in?
He's out of college now, but I think the interest rate is around, I want to say around 7%.
Oh, yeah, which seems high, obviously, yeah. Okay, well, a couple of things. All right, first, Catherine, thanks for raising the issue on the healthcare side. Look, I continue to hear from small business people like you or individuals about premiums, and it's not just, and look, this is the problem with the Affordable Care Act, where a lot of promises were made. You could keep your doctor, you could keep your health plan. That was not the case. I talked to cancer patients. They lost all the ability to have that continuity of care. Very, very sad and tragic, actually, for a lot of these folks that had to change their regimen of care. In some cases, have declined care, for instance. And then you have the concept of high deductibles. And these deductibles are so high that essentially you don't have insurance. And so you get the card, but it doesn't cover your costs. And so it's one of the results where a lot of people were bought a bill of goods by saying, okay, well, now a lot of new young people are going to come into the system. That's going to bring down the cost for everybody. Well, guess what? A lot of young people didn't come in the system. They would have rather paid the penalty than buy a product they didn't want or felt they didn't need, and it was too expensive for them to afford. And cheaper to pay a penalty, which, by the way, the individual mandate has been abolished now, so we got rid of that, thankfully. So there are things we can do to move in a better direction, allow small businesses to pool together so you can be similar to a larger company and spread your risk out. That's very important with associated health plans. Medical liability reform is very important. Now, we're always fighting the trial lawyers and the special interests on that side, but that helps, obviously, get in the right direction. And then we should be allowing insurance to be bought and sold across state lines. That's only going to allow more competition. And then transparency is really key because nobody knows how much these procedures or items cost when they visit a doctor or a healthcare provider. In fact, the doctors don't even know. It bases on a middleman of insurance, and that is an ongoing problem that also needs to be addressed. And the government can't come up with every component of that, but I do think we have to sort of Minnesotatize the conversation around health care, keep young people on their parents' policy through age 26, and make sure you don't have lifetime caps, but then do some of those other reforms to actually lower the costs. And by the way, give states more flexibility to address the population care in the manner that they see better need. On this college loan side, 7% seems really high on college student loans. I'll just tell you, back a few years ago, there was a rollout of, on higher education that the old administration did that reduced a lot of choice and flexibility for people getting loans. And that, thankfully there wasn't a fight any longer going on about where student loans would be at or what the percentage is. But the bigger problem has been all the Pell Grants that have gone to students, on the loan programs that have gone to students have been shown by the studies at the Federal Reserve, New York Federal Reserve, that the tuition goes up 65 cents on the dollar for loans, that the tuition goes up 50 cents on the dollar for Pell Grants. So you've got a system in place that's driving higher inflationary dollars for education because it's built into the system. So there's got to be more accountability in that. So I don't have an answer in terms of how do you get that 7% down, other than I would, and maybe this is a case situation where our office could maybe help, because I know that there's possible opportunities for consolidation of loans and et cetera that we work with the different loan agencies. So our office might be able to help along that front. And if you call our Eden Prairie office, we've got someone there who might be able to just do some inquiries and check and find out if there's some options or better options in terms of getting that down a little bit. Can't guarantee it, but it's something that we should absolutely explore on your behalf and see if we can do it. Okay, we've got Sandy from Mound. Thanks for waiting.
Yes, thank you. I just had a couple of short comments and then a quick question. I have so many things I would like to ask you sometime, but just a comment that I have used a PIN number because my identity was stolen through our Social Security that my husband and I filed together, and that has worked well for the last 3 years for me. I came to your office in the beginning because I couldn't understand why I received check when we hadn't even filed yet, and then I took care of it on my own and went to all the different departments and so forth, and that PIN number or whatever you call it has worked well for us.
Oh, good.
The other thing I wanted to comment, I do not like the divisiveness of what's going on, and no one does, I don't think, and without getting into too much detail about how the tone has been set by the leaders of our government, I really wish that the things that President Obama did well would be talked about, because there were a lot of things for those 8 years. We wouldn't be where we are now, right now with the economy, if it weren't for those 8 years that he took care of things, well, he and the Senate and the House of Representatives. So I just really don't like that when that happens. It makes me feel sad, and I would like more positive statements made. There were a lot of positive statements about those 8 years, and I think you know that as well. Then my question is, because my concern has been mainly this, along with many other things, is I would like your answer on what we're going to do about assault rifles and banning them. I have family that are teachers and work in hospitals and so forth, and I know that the fact that they have to run these drills and so forth now is just awful. It used to be no matter what that was, but I just want to know what's going to be done about that. That's my sole thing with that, along with background checks. And we have people in our families that so
got it.
Anyway,
thanks, Sandy. Thanks. So real quick. First of all, thanks for sharing the tax refund story yourself. We've heard from other people, exact same situation. Refund stolen. You got to work through all the hoops and traps. So that authentication, my legislation would roll that out for everyone that you have the ability to use. I'm glad it's worked successfully for you, and we'll make note of that too. Is another example. I could not agree more about the divisiveness component. Look, my experience in Congress or being elected is that if you want to be successful as a legislator, you got to work across the aisle. You got to build relationships. It doesn't do any good to name call or pick fights. And look, a lot of my colleagues on the left and the right, they come here and they're ideologically driven, and they've got a certain mission along that front. My approach is very different. I'm number 3 out of the entire House of Representatives of 435 for getting the most bipartisan support for legislation, signing on bills. If it's a good idea, I want Democrats and Republicans to be on it. So I think that's really important way to go. And that's because I shop my bills around on the House floor. I spend the time doing it. Now, part of this is because I'm a Minnesotan, right? And Minnesotans just do things that way. And I think some of my other colleagues could use a little dose of Minnesota from that perspective. But it does work. And so President Obama, he ended up signing my human trafficking legislation. He signed my medical device tax repeal suspension. And we had to get bipartisan buy-in for that. And President Trump, look, I want him and the country to be successful. I agree with him on some of the economic policy, not on trade, but on tax and where we're going. And so part of it is just making sure we're not being divisive ourselves. And that's part of, I think the temptation that some have to be on cable news and just take shots at folks. And, you know the shows. They have one on each side of the anchor, and they're always talking at each other. They're not talking with each other. It's also why I go to the group called the Problem Solvers Caucus and the No Labels group, because it's a good bipartisan group of folks that are trying to make progress on health care and immigration. And actually some of those tenets, policies have actually now been successful in the bipartisan compromises that we had in the budget recently. And finally, on the gun issue, I will mention this, is that I talked to, maybe you missed the opening too, but gun violence restraining orders, very common sense approach to filling a gap in the system, whether we saw it in Parkland or in other areas. Banning bump stocks, common sense from my perspective, result of a device that makes something into a machine gun, which are illegal right now. Now, I would just say on the assault weapon issue, assault weapons are categorized not necessarily by the function, but how they look. And so that's where the gun violence research is very important, because they had a assault weapons ban for a period of time, and they showed there was statistically no differential for gun violence in that time frame. So it shouldn't be how the gun looks. It should be how the gun functions, right, or what you're trying to achieve through that month. So, and I am trying to focus on what actually we can get done, we can get across the finish line. Background checks, you also mentioned, very important. We can do more enhancing of that. We had some success a month ago, where now you have to require agencies like the Air Force to put in domestic violence issues, dishonorable discharges in the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. That was not the case before, which is why we had that tragedy in Texas. That's been addressed now and fixed, which is important, but more can be done. Okay, excuse me, we're going to keep rolling. I think we've got John on the line from Mound also. Thanks for waiting.
Hi, thank you for taking my repeat question. On the question of opioids, you deferred my question to the funding of CDC, but I may have misspoken. My question is much simpler than that. What I wanted to know was, what is your position on who should be the key person in opioid prescription? Should it be the medical provider, or should it be the politician's bill?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, just from that perspective, John, I think obviously your physicians and a doctor-patient relationship is key. We had a physician who came out and spoke to us from HCMC, and he came and shared his experience with members on our committee as we were looking at opioid legislation, saying he is trying to educate other doctors and physicians to not overprescribe. When you only need to prescribe 10 pills, prescribe 10. Don't do 30. Because the tendency has been it's so easy to make big prescription amounts, right? Which is why we have such an abundance of those in medicine cabinets that expire, et cetera. And I've gone to, the Teen Challenge, I visited Hazeltine, all these addictive treatment centers, and it's terrible when you meet with these young people who talk about how easy it was to access this medicine. And then in turn, it gets them on heroin, which is really cheap and unfortunately affordable, and it's a whole other issue where a lot of the overdoses are coming from these days. So we should, as policymakers, not be saying, you can only prescribe 10 pills or whatever, but we should be making sure that there is more attention, like on the bill that we will have tomorrow on my behalf for seniors in Medicare Part D, where we're actually directing and mandating that there are actual education components that would be provided to patients from the doctors or from the providers themselves about the risks to avoid overutilization of those pills, for instance. Okay, I'm being told that we have reached a 1-hour time frame and that we have to wind down. If we did not get to your question, do not hang up. You automatically go into a queue, and then either myself or someone on my staff, we basically just get back to you in the next 24 hours, and we just keep rolling. I want to thank everyone who's taken the time to join me also for my open office hours that we've had recently. It just gives another opportunity for me to listen and learn. I visit with a lot of companies, went to 247 classrooms, as I mentioned earlier. Every school, every teacher gives a different perspective, which is very helpful. And the only way I can be more effective is to basically listen to these different points of view, act on those, and then making sure that your continued feedback is being provided. So I really appreciate that. If we can be helpful in any way, don't hesitate to reach out to office or visit if you're actually in Washington. And thanks for the privilege of representing you. These are tough, challenging times in a very highly partisan-charged environment. But I do think taking the approach of building relationships, working across the aisle, and as I've done in some of my legislation, that's how you legislate. And as the pendulum swings back and forth with different people in charge or in control, we just got to make sure we're helping people better their lives, or helping Minnesota get stronger as an example of where we have opportunities to go and achieve with the economy improving especially. So thanks for joining tonight, and have a great evening and a great night, and we'll be in touch.
The Access Live event has ended.
Thank you again for participating in my telephone town hall meeting. I'm sorry I was unable to get to everyone's question, but please feel free to leave my staff a voicemail with any questions, comments, or concerns from the call. This is an emergency. You can contact my district office at 952-405-8510. We'll be sure to get right back in touch with you. Thanks again, and it's an honor serving you in Congress.
If you wish to leave a message, please press 1. Otherwise, you may simply hang up.